right, there we go. We're rolling. Good evening and good afternoon to me. Daniel, Inca, how are you guys?
Good. Hi, Celia. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Getting ready for our chat number 8, talking about trauma, and have a lot of questions prepared for you guys. And I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing your insights and just to chatting a lot about this stuff.
Nice.
Okay, well, hold on. Let's get started. Um, I as always want to make sure that a lot of the things I talk about and ask you guys have to do with things that are from the perspective of somebody who's coming into this, just knowing maybe they feel crappy, maybe there's something going on in their lives they don't know about, maybe they want to make a change, they want to grow, but they don't know how. Maybe they're dealing with relationship issues with other people, with themselves. Maybe they're feeling a host of symptoms that are emotional, psychological, and they either don't know much about it or have tried a lot of things and don't know what to do next, right? And so we're in this era of finally of not just seeing mental illness as just this chemical imbalance and this thing that you're just passed down, and it's in your family and that's it. Like, there's nothing that you can do about it. And we're starting to tap into this idea that hey, there's something must have happened that affected you, and your emotions are a very important role. So when I ask you these questions, I want to make sure that it's coming from a perspective of somebody who maybe doesn't know what's going on or isn't as informed as they could be. And that's where you guys come in. You guys, as therapists, as people who help on a daily basis with these kinds of issues, can not only help people but shed light and information on these kinds of things. So I think there are things that might sound like we're kind of regurgitating the same things over and over again, but I think it's because there are a lot of nuances as well. So with that in mind, I wanted to start off with a question that I think would be a good way to start it. And the way my question goes is basically like this. There are so many things that we as humans do on our day-to-day basis, and some of them we already classify as being, quote unquote, bad for us. Like we go around our lives maybe sometimes over, burnt out. We sometimes have road rage. There's a lot of things that happen in our lives that are caused by trauma, that are caused by emotional overwhelm or just not feeling very good. Things like depression and anxiety are something that's very common right now in mainstream society, and people talk about it. What are things that you have seen in our behaviors as human beings that are based off of trauma that maybe you see in our society that other people might not see? Kind of like I know Gabor Mate talks about how he talked in a podcast how sometimes because he's a therapist, he sees people kind of like in the Matrix. So like he sees, like, in the Matrix, Neo sees things like with code, people have like zeros and ones. And so sometimes he sees people as like trauma. He sees like the way they act as trauma. So, and with that being said, do you see that as well? Do you see society playing out traumas that people don't see as being traumatic, things that they do?
So thank you very much for that question. And the short answer is yes. And now we continue with the long answer. We have defined trauma as everything which is not calm, peaceful, and emotionally light. So also to your introduction, you mentioned mental illness. We define the mental illness in the moment where somebody can't function anymore within the normal limits within society. And there are certain criteria for each mental illness to be diagnosed by. But also people without the diagnosis of a mental illness have trauma from our definition of trauma. Mm-hmm. It's not the definition that people use for PTBS or something like this. But it's PTSD, sorry, the other one was a German abbreviation, yes. So PTSD, exactly. And that's also for this diagnosis, there are certain criteria which the medical society has created, and we use a different set of criteria and saying that everything which is not feeling calm, peaceful, and emotionally light from the Institute for the Study of Peak States is considered trauma. That's because the Institute for the Study of Peak States has done some research finding that all these emotional states originate from different kinds of problems within the development, the human development, and that looks traumatic, basically. So when your question is if, or Gabo Mate said that he sees trauma playing out in our society, I said yes, automatically, because when somebody comes to me and says something rude, out of nothing, just like this, why would he do that? Okay? And the reason is not because he's stupid or uneducated or something like this, but because there is an emotional state which drives that person to that behavior. Mm-hmm. In this emotional state, because it's not calm and peaceful and emotionally light, otherwise there wouldn't be a drive for behavior, is caused by, in our definition, trauma. Mm-hmm. So when everybody would be without trauma, so everybody would be calm, peaceful, and emotionally light, we would just live our lives and there wouldn't be conflict, there wouldn't be blaming, there wouldn't be finger pointing, there wouldn't be lying, there wouldn't be, please Inka help me, I'm looking for examples, very specific examples. There wouldn't be fighting, there wouldn't be running away, like there wouldn't be silent treatment, and in all these behaviors discussed between the traditional drama discussed between people wouldn't be there.
Pushing buttons for each other, all that.
Okay, so much of our normal, what is considered normal social interaction, human to human behavior, is driven by emotions, and then basically if these emotions not just come and go, okay, but they stuck, and then we are not calm and peaceful and emotionally light, and then we have trauma, and then basically our behavior most of the time is trauma driven. Once you started the work and you learn to differentiate, and you have made experience about being calm and peaceful and emotionally light, then you slowly start to determine that there might be something else, but we usually don't call that emotion anymore. There's something like a hunch or like an intuition. Okay, that feels I have to go in a certain way. But this is very, very, very tiny and not that loud as normal human emotion that we use and that we see basically also in the comments on Facebook or on TikTok or wherever where people interact emotionally. Does that make sense?
For the most part, I think I got a little confused at the very end in terms of what you were talking about hunches and how that related to trauma. Could you maybe repeat that? I got kind of confused there.
Well, from my point of view, and that might vary a little bit also to what the Institute for the Study of Peak States says, is that there's an internal emotional movement which is very loud. Okay, I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel something which is loud. Even though if it's, and we measure that in therapy, we measure that from 0, nothing, to 10.
Right.
Okay, and 10 is maximum. And the thing is, and there is also a characteristic of stuck. Okay, so for example, if I think about that book that I have to read, and I said, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed and I don't have time and so on, then I put my attention somewhere else. I basically forget about the book. But as soon as I think back about the book, these emotions come back. So they're stuck. They're basically glued to the book.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not CPL. I'm not calm, peaceful, and light. And I have stuck emotions. So basically whenever I think about the book, they're stuck. That's trauma. Okay. And when I go my way and I'm CPL, and then I have like a intuition, like a hunch to go left now. And then perhaps I meet you on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's something else in me, which you can call intuition, which has also like a flavor of that emotion, but it's usually much, much, much softer.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes and it goes and it doesn't stay. So it's not something I should have turned left. No. It's not something like this. It just comes and goes. And if you don't pay attention to it, that's fine as well. Okay? But this is also something, and I think that's my very personal opinion. I think that's why people so often trust these strong traumatic emotions, because the underlying mechanism is the same. The underlying mechanism is to follow this feeling of this path, basically, which is guided. That's something within us that we should follow that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That this is good for us, that this is our, I don't know, however you want to call it, path in life or life path or whatever. And because that's a mechanism inside of us, we also follow our traumatic emotions, because there's also something inside. They're just way louder. Mm-hmm. And usually they don't guide us to meet you on the street, but they actually guide me to meet what I'm trying to avoid.
Okay.
So traumatic, if we follow our traumatic feelings, usually that's not for your own benefit.
Okay. Is it pretty common that we're always following our traumatic feelings? Is it because they're there? I mean, because they're familiar?
I think they're there. We're following them because the mechanism is that we follow our intuition. And we don't know what is intuition and what is trauma. Nobody showed us that in school, and nobody showed us also how to resolve trauma, to basically get rid of all that noise and find the signal, find the path we want to follow. Mm-hmm. And since this trauma piles on from generation to generation, it's just way too loud. Okay, it's Grand Central Station in New York every day, everywhere, so you don't know which way to turn, because
right.
That small signal is perhaps that small cat that's running around and can't even see it.
Gotcha.
Okay, yeah. And so that's my personal belief, and Inka might have a different one there. But out of the work I've done, we know that emotions are the strong ones. Where people say, "Oh, I feel sad right now. That's my emotion. That's the strong one. That's not this intuition." This intuitive hunch that I have that I can follow. And that is more, I work with my traumas and get rid of it and do the processes and do the work on a hopefully daily basis. The more you clean up, and then you start seeing these small intuition, hunches, feelings, whatever you want to call them, small guidance, which will bring you to nice places.
Okay. Thank you for your take. That's great.
Inka, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm not quite sure how you ended up with the hunches, intuition stuff. As far as I could follow, it was like the question was about like how much of our daily life is actually driven by trauma, and the answer is pretty much still everything. The feeling of not being triggered in one way or another, or having some kind of stress or emotional upset, is really very, very rare for people who are not consciously working on this stuff. Most of them are not aware that such a state could even exist. So when they perceive it the first time, it's really a big aha for them.
Mm-hmm.
But when you know that basically the majority of human beings on this planet are not in a place where they can see reality for what it is, because whenever you're upset or triggered or in trauma, whatever you want to call it, you are not perceiving reality. You're just seeing what reality looks like through the filter that you have. And you can never perceive what it's really like without getting rid of that trauma or eliminating it or working on it in a method that allows you to really get to this point of calm, peaceful, and lightness.
Okay.
And that's basically the starting point for if you really wanted to do things differently on this planet.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a huge. I mean, that's a huge number.
yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, I think both questions are great. I think I understand where Daniel went with the idea of, because the idea was like, how, does trauma affect our lives? And naturally the answer is yes, or we wouldn't be having these chats. But the other part was, how does it play out in ways that are different to what most people see, right? So most people think of trauma as PTSD. That's a given, and it's pretty much there, and that's a good place where we're at when I talk about mainstream adoption of this idea and how it's playing out in our society. But I think that was a great answer in terms of how does it differ from what most people think. That's a great take on. Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you're feeling something. It's very hard for you to not see the world through that, right? When you're, I don't know, feeling lonely or feeling hurt, you might feel like nobody's there for you, or you might have a lot of thoughts about how you see the world and how the world really is.
Take that for a fact. Right?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, the world is a piece of shit, or the world is evil, or you can't trust anybody. You go,
Nobody loves me.
yeah, exactly, and that's how the world feels. That is the like you're saying, that's the reality of it, which is it might shift completely. Like when you have a euphoric moment. I'll give you an example. For me, like, I play a lot of music, and just like many artists, I have my moments where I'm like, oh, I'm so good. And then you listen to somebody else who's very, very talented, and you're like, oh, I am not so good. And then, you oscillate between these two kind of things. And I had some great news for a song I wrote, something that would validate the path I'm on in that perspective. And it colors how I perceive the world. I think, oh, you know what? I am good. This is something that these external things validate me, which goes to show that that I'm sure there are parts within me that need to be healed in terms of my self-worth and my self-worth towards music and my perceptions, and that's why it's so easy to manipulate my reality and my own self-worth. But yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And I think what Daniel was talking about is also something that, it isn't very common, that almost like unconsciously we're guided by our traumas to these certain paths. And it's hard to differentiate between what it is that we want and what our traumas and our emotions that maybe we haven't processed, and how they dictate the choices we make. Is that correct? Are those things correct?
Yeah, and that's what I try to relate. So I don't think there's something fundamentally flawed with humans when they follow emotions. Mm-hmm. Well, if we define emotions as traumatic emotions, then yes. But the inner mechanism is that there's some sort of guidance system, and that's what I call the hunch. I try to avoid this term emotional guidance system, because emotions are these big things what people associate with sadness, anger, and so on. So these are traumatic. And I don't have a better word, so perhaps we just stick with the intuition. And in trauma, and these emotions generated from trauma might feel like these small intuitions, which we usually would follow, but we can't because they're the louder ones, the stronger ones, which don't let us see them. So
this is excuse me to say, but intuition and emotions can never be confused when we're talking about negative emotions. It's just not possible. You just need to be clear that this is not the case. Intuition doesn't make you feel anything like sad or angry or grieving or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, not that strong. Not that strong, but there's like something, no, don't go this way. Okay? And this is like a...
No, it wouldn't go, no, don't go this way. It will go, this is where you need to be.
Well, that's as I said, it's a very, very new territory.
Positive.
Yes. And we can argue about this, and we won't find some proof of that right now. And the thing is, there's something underneath, okay, and which we are perhaps hardwired or something. We are used to listen to that, okay, and then there's something louder which makes it impossible to listen to it. I think, Inga, we can agree on that, right?
Say that again.
There's something underneath, and then comes trauma, and we want to listen to that underneath, and then there comes something which is louder, and so we are not listening to what we should be listening, basically, but we're listening to trauma, and then basically the human drama plays out.
Okay, tell me again why we should be listening to something.
Yeah, because that's like the guidance that's there. That's what you call innately positive.
Yeah, but you don't have to listen for it. It's just there. If you feel a need to listen, that's already probably a trauma filter.
Okay, see, now we're getting very close, and I think we're going to lose people right now. So let's just be on the
Too
path.
Specialized, okay.
There is something, and that's why we don't disregard our emotions, but the emotions that we know and people wrote books and made movies about that and so on. These are what we see trauma, and we agree on that, and perhaps say you can take it from there.
Okay. Well, it would be a great topic to talk about intuition, but maybe we'll save it for another one, because that is a very, very important topic as well. I mean, that's great. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your inputs on this. I think it's super important because I think that's the talking point. I mean, one thing that I see a lot on the internet is this shared communication through memes of our current emotional travels. I don't know how to say that better, but I see it everywhere online. I travel a lot of the Reddit community and Facebook, and I think most people have pretty clear that, and more each day, that the way their lives are playing out is a lot on this trauma field, on these behaviors that help them cope through life. Whether it's binging on television, going out to drink, which has been pretty common for a long time. These their path on life is not what they want it to be, and I see it a lot when I say like this memification of language, because it's almost like a buffer of saying how I see it with memes, like actual memes where people will make a joke about their mental state, because it's a good way of sharing that they feel like crap, and these are the things that they do to feel better, and it's kind of funny, and they can kind of talk about it, which is, I mean, it's great. It's a good start. And yeah, I see trauma play out everywhere. I see it in people's. Go ahead.
And I would like to emphasize that that's an awesome start, because we need to be able to communicate about about this stuff, about our emotions, about trauma, before we to be able to accept it. And when we're accepting it, we are able to do something about it. If we try to hide it, like previous generation have done it, because society's rules are, don't do that, that's bad, you're going to be separated, you're going to be you're put in jail or whatever. So lots of this has piled up inside of our ancestors, and they have passed it on to us, and now we have to get rid of it and have to do the work. And I think the step from not talking about it, keeping secrets, okay, and now getting more open about it, posting about it worldwide, to the global community, and basically acknowledging that right now life is in a certain way. And then people group and say, yeah, for me it's the same. And so they find some sort of social group, they find some sort of acknowledgement, and that gives them perhaps the strength to do the next step. Yeah, after they've seen they are not outcast, they're not wrong, they're not broken, they're not something, but many people share the same thing. They start to talk about it, they start to listen to podcasts like ours, and then the next step is to start doing something about it. Yeah. So I think it's a fantastic development.
Yeah, I agree.
It's slow but fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I the one thing that still like it bothers me, and I think we had this talk, like we talked about this maybe on the first or second chat, was this paradox of we have a medical community, like when we're sick, when we're injured, when we have something like a broken foot, or when we have something that we have to go to the doctor for to get fixed or healed or better, and we have the tools for it in the medical community. Like nobody there is no stigma, there is no shame to a broken foot, like there's no need to hide it. You just say, I have a broken foot. And I think the biggest paradox, or the biggest irony, is that we, to an extent, at least to an academic extent, we still classify mental illness as an illness. So it's still an illness, yet we have so much stigma around it, right? And that to me baffles me, because if it's an illness, then we can treat it, and it's an illness. So when we talk about this trauma field, then we have more tools to actually fix it. And I think the idea alone of talking about this as these wounds that we carry, these emotional wounds that we have, I mean, they are personal and they are ours. But the fact that we can actually work on them and get better, I think should be the catalyst to taking some of that shame out, which is it's holding this thing as, I mean, it's not the same as a broken foot, because it is personal to ours. It is our story. But at the same time, when we have these tools to get better at them, I think you can actually detach from them a little bit, right? So when you are, like, let's say you are depressed, or you're anxious, or you're dealing with some kind of behavior that's something you can't control very easily, or it takes a lot of energy, like you may be socially anxious, and so you feel like it's all on you. But if you have these tools that can help you let go of those feelings, and then those behaviors are just not automatic anymore, then you can detach yourself a little bit from that. And you can say, you can even go to people and be like, I'm really socially anxious, but I am, I'm working on these things, and I'm actually like feeling myself get better because we have these tools. And I don't know if it's maybe that we have these we didn't have these tools before, but I think that's one of the most important things, that we can start talking about this as people want to talk about it. If you want to talk about it as an illness, then then there shouldn't be a stigma, because just because there's no stigma around a broken foot. So I mean, I'm sure that argument has some, people might say differently, but I think as a society, I think as human beings, and I think as healers, people who are, and therapists, that's where we should be working towards, because I think that's where we're going to get the least amount of friction. And when we have the least amount of friction, then more people are willing to try to step into these areas of healing and these spaces of being uncomfortable as shit with how they feel, and taking these risks on themselves.
Amen. I like to agree with that, and but I think there are also other fields in medicine where there's stigma. So if we think about STDs,
right,
and if we think about male or female reproductive system organ diseases, then we very quickly come to a place. From my point of view, I think it has something to do with not being able to fix it, having a cure perhaps,
mm-hmm.
or having that disease as a result of a behavior which the society thinks is shameful, and so we gotta hide it. Yeah, so we don't become the outcast. I think that's some kind of logic in most of these scenarios when the stigma arises, that somebody with an STD did meet many people. Meeting many people in bed is not something which society likes, and so basically with an STD, she would admit that she behaved in a way that society didn't like, and society now has the right to cast that person out. And I think because that is life-threatening, yeah, people start to, okay, I don't want to have my life threatened, so what do? I hide it. It's the best thing. Nobody knows. And
sorry.
Yeah, and so the stigma comes because if we would talk openly about it, this whole thing would play out. But that's why I like this meme, because now the stigma goes out because it's open, it's in the public. Yeah, and even Hollywood actors admit of having had depression or having anxiety or something. So even the people who other people admire talk about it, and I think that helps. Inga, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, I was saying this whole thing with stigma is a perfect segue to look into protections. Because all the stuff that we don't like to see in ourselves, that's what we find bad in others. We find all kinds of reasons to reject them, exclude them, because they're not fitting the bill as we feel ourselves that we should be. So anything that we have in ourselves, maybe we want to mess around like we think the person with an STD has done. But because we don't want to accept that fact in ourselves, we go and blame this other person to the point where we actually stigmatize and cast them out.
Inka, can you explain that a little bit more detail and more concrete, please? I like that example very much, but I think it's difficult perhaps to follow.
Yeah, me too. I like it. I like it a lot.
Okay, good. So you mentioned this thing that, for example, stigmatization is not only happening with people who feel the need that they would want to see a therapist, because that gets them the stamp of you're a cuckoo, to be putting it bluntly. But you also mentioned that you could say the same thing about STDs, that there's stigma attached to it. So what does that even mean, stigma attached? That means what's going on behind other people's forehead, basically, is projection. Yeah, that the person who has an STD, they must obviously have been messing around too much, having had too many sexual contacts. That's bad, and so we don't like them. And we don't like them because there's this tiny voice that says, "Man, that's a lucky dog. I would have liked to do that too, but I'm afraid." So we project that part of ourselves onto the other person. And because that part is unacceptable in ourselves, that person becomes unacceptable to us. Is that clear enough?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, very nice. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty common. I mean, think we all do that, and I think that's a great example of how we. Would you say projection is itself trauma, or it's a response to our. How exactly is it related to trauma? I mean, you're talking about these parts of us that we don't like. So when you're saying that, are you saying that these little parts are maybe they're just repressed parts of ourselves? Is that necessarily trauma, or is that just?
It is. I might be getting too technical here again, but yes, it's trauma. It's trauma that goes back into development, into parts of ourselves that we didn't integrate properly. Simple biological bits that weren't integrated biologically later show up as not being integrated emotionally, psychologically.
Okay.
Did I lose you there?
No, not at all. I'm just thinking about it. I'm thinking about how it relates to the other questions we have, because I
Let's use an example that we pretty much all are familiar with.
Yeah.
We all know that when our parents got together and made us, there was an egg and a sperm involved, right? I think that part is pretty clear to everyone. So if the egg and the sperm had a little accident and things didn't go quite as smoothly as they could have been, that little accident translates into a projection on the female or the male part, for example. Yeah. So later on, we think all men are like this or all women are like that. And a lot of that comes from a projection between those two parts. Yeah. The projection happens when the integration didn't go smoothly, and that hiccup translates itself into an emotion and a rejection and other projections that are going on. Does it make sense?
Yeah, so you're saying that from a very, very early stage, and we're talking there's a lot of, what is it? We've talked about generational trauma, and we've talked about biographical trauma, but this sounds like it's even earlier than that, like developmental trauma.
It's in its form actually a kind of biographical trauma, but it's a special type, and we can find it when we look for those moments where we had different parts of ourselves coming together to make a new whole.
Okay.
Like in our case with the conception moment, where we have the egg and the sperm coming together, creating a whole new being.
Okay. And so in these moments, you're saying that we're experiencing actual feelings, or these issues that happened during this stage eventually manifest as feelings?
Yeah. We had a little biological accident that things didn't go quite as optimally as they could have been going, and it translates into these feelings later on.
Well, that's a hot take. That's that's something that you don't hear a lot. That's really interesting. And how are you supposed to work through these things?
There's a special technique for that. We can't disclose that here because it's a proprietary technique. But essentially, if you have a way to integrate that, then that's how you do it.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting, which actually kind of plays into my next question, because you've mentioned this word a couple times, and it's the idea of integration, right? You keep saying integration, and I think for most people, a lot of times we're very familiar with what's going on in our lives, what we like, what we don't like about our lives, what we want to accomplish, and our limitations, our self-limitations, and how these traumas play out in our lives, whether we know it or we don't. and once you start delving into the field of trauma therapy and traumatology, and there are certain words that come up a lot. One of those is integration. There are parts of us that are not integrated to our self or our whole. There's a lot of ways that you hear those these expressions. So I was wondering if it's something you guys can talk to a little bit more about. Like say I'm just listening to this for the first time, and I'm thinking about, I don't know, oh, like this sounds interesting to me. I have these issues that maybe sound like they could be trauma related. How do I, as a practitioner, or maybe and as people who have done this work yourselves, to get to the stage where you can help people with deep issues, how does it experientially, how it feels when you're healing trauma? Can you talk a bit more about that? Can you talk about how, depending on the techniques that you guys use, the power therapies that you guys use, as they're called, how does that process look like? I mean, as you're going through it, is it pretty standard for most people? Are you seeing an emotion? Are you seeing a feeling? Are you seeing it dissolve? Are you seeing it play out in your head again? We've talked about how people have very direct traumas where they can remember specifically what it is that they can't move past from. Some people just feel a sadness, and some people just feel sensations in their body that they're not sure what they're about. We've talked about that, but we haven't really talked about how it feels like to heal, how it goes from feeling that feeling all the way to not feeling that feeling. If you guys can talk about that, that would be great.
Okay. Well, the modality I'm working with is based on acceptance. So that means, yes, you feel your stuff, you feel it in the body, you feel everything that's going on. And by allowing yourself to really feel what's there, interestingly, you can go away. It's a bit of a paradox. Yeah? The less you want it to go away, the faster it can go. You just stay with the feeling in the body. And just allow it to be there. What most people do is they find all kinds of ways to not feel it, and to not experience it, and to go out of the body, or to avoid the topic altogether, or to blame others for it. That's all avoidance of the actual feeling that's there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So another paradox. So by feeling it, by actually being able to be with it, does it just dissolve? Does it usually come with some insight? I feel like sometimes when we talk about healing stuff, or not even just healing stuff, but your emotions tend to give you information. Does it usually come with some form of insight? I mean, because sometimes when I think about,
it's just stuff that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Okay. So the insight is just maybe in how many ways it has played out in your life.
Yes.
And now you can finally let it go.
But please don't try it alone. Yeah? Small disclaimer. We are just trying to explain how it looks like. And when the first time you're doing this, please go to somebody who's well versed in these techniques and can guide you doing these techniques. But as we always point out, they're pretty simple as a technique when you know what you're doing. Okay?
It's a bit like Columbus and his egg, yeah?
Yes.
You need to know what you're doing.
So that's there are some self-help books. So the Institute has published the Wholehearted Healing workbook from Paulo Coelho. You can find it on a big global online store and buy it there and read through it if you're interested in these techniques. But please, for the first time, go find a therapist who you like to work with and show it to him, talk to him or her, and see what you can do. Because usually people are very, very well structured. So the first time they show small problem, and then you work, and then you get more familiar with the techniques, and then slowly you go to your bigger problems, your bigger issues. But sometimes just a big issue comes up, and then you're alone with that big issue. So that's not very wise to do. Okay?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Again, we're just talking to inform people. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Definitely reach out to somebody who, like Inka and Daniel, who have done a lot of work, who help clients, who are trained in this, and yeah, don't do this at home. Just make sure you have somebody who can guide you through your issues. Thank you for clarifying that. And that's really good to know, because I still find that really interesting, because I guess I always assume that when you get to, I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you are, because I don't think every trauma is the same, but let's say some behaviors play out differently than others depending on the trauma. So let's say you have a negative view of yourself. Maybe you don't like yourself too much, or maybe you don't think you're good at something, and you just have this strong belief that you're just, I don't know, like let's say you're not good at sports, and you just say, like, I'm just not good at sports, like I'm not good at learning stuff, and then you find a way to be with these feelings, and then they go away. I guess from what I've read, and as I understood it, and in the trauma field, what would happen would be that you let go of that feeling, however it is that it's healed in you, and then you would also have like some sort of epiphany, like, I actually feel like I can do stuff. Or you don't have that voice in your head, and you feel like you feel competent, or you feel like you can do that stuff, or at least you feel like you don't have those negative self-beliefs. But you're saying it's more just like you just don't have that feeling anymore?
Yeah, you don't have that feeling anymore. And sometimes, as Inka pointed out, there's like some wisdom coming up inside of you, understanding, that's why I've done this, or that's like 5 times I've done that in my life. Or you simply have like a smaller, no, not smaller, a bigger picture of how this, what you were working on, affected your life. Okay, so it's like a grain of wisdom, perhaps, but not like regarding how to build a spaceship or something, but just on what will happen to you in your life.
Okay.
Yeah. I know that a lot of other modalities have this kind of, and what's your reframe of the situation now? Might sound a bit arrogant here, but I think that trauma was very fully healed. That is why you need to mentally compensate for something. That's just my 5 cents on that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I agree on that. So when you still are not CPL, when you're still not on a 0 from 0 to 10, there's still some trauma left, and to be able to work with that or to live with that feeling, you generate a new mind model and explain something to be able to suppress the mind that suppresses this emotion, and sweep them under the rug. And that's then perhaps the big wisdom. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about real trauma healing to get to a calm, peaceful state, or to a neutral state, which is a 0. And then you might get these insights about how this issue affects your life.
Okay. Interesting. That's good to know. I mean, I think that's an important question, because whether you get some discussion on it, whether you get people to agree on it or not, I think it's important, because that's one thing I've noticed, that people have different perspectives on, depending on the technique you have. And I personally do find that I question that, or I don't know if that's the right word, but I definitely wonder why that would be the case. Like, why you would have to feel something positive or reframed, when ultimately, like we've talked about, emotions are data. So, at least the lack of a negative feeling, at least would be neutral. At least you would be like a blank canvas. so to speak. If you didn't have, I don't know, if we're talking about these negative self beliefs. Maybe they were from generational stuff. Maybe they're from biographical stuff, things that happened in your life that made you feel that way. But at least if you didn't have the negative feelings, you would be neutral. But as to being positive, I feel like maybe life would do that, but definitely don't know why you would have to need to be positive. I feel like the hardest thing is just the limits, the limitations you put on yourself. I feel like that's what colors mostly your life. So thank you for that.
With the type of trauma healing that we're doing, maybe you could also see it like that. What you get is an ability, and it's an ability that was blocked before. The ability to deal with this kind of situations, and you just have it. There's no mental explanation necessary for that.
That's really, I mean, that's great, and I think I know what you're talking about. You know, I'll be open. I've been practicing some of these techniques. I've been working with Daniel a bit, and I actually want to talk about something that happened to me yesterday, which was fantastic. And I deal a lot with these sensations in my body that are really uncomfortable, and they take me out of the present moment. So a lot of my conscious awareness, and my perception has been kind of focused on my body, you know? So a lot of my energy, my I don't know how to put it, my expenditure of my awareness goes into these places because it's so uncomfortable. And you know, on a day to day, I have to do a lot of stuff just like anyone else. I have to, work, and I have to do this and do that and move, and I want to keep growing as a person, and I want to have a home, and I want to do a lot of things that a lot of people want to do. And so it's kind of a pain in the ass when I have a lot of I have this sensation in my chest that just takes some of that awareness away, and I can't be in the present. And I've been very carefully learning this and asking questions and just going about it. And yesterday I did something that I loved before having to deal with all these traumatic things that kind of popped up some years ago. I love going to theme parks, and I went to a theme park with my wife. But the day before, I had been doing some of these tapping techniques and these techniques that you guys do on myself, and I did them for maybe 2 hours. And I reached the place where I was like, okay, I'm going to go to sleep. And then the next day, I felt literally present. I felt very present. There were a lot of things still, but they were much more subtle. They were incredibly subtle compared to what I'm usually dealing with. And it was the first time in a long time that I went to this theme park, and also because nobody's been out since COVID. I really wanted to enjoy that day, and it was great. I was present. I could really be in the moment. And I know that this is just a taste of the things that I want to work on. So for me, that was a fantastic feeling. I even got teary-eyed for a little bit because I was so happy that I was able to be in the present. That alone is a gift. That alone is completely a gift. That you are there, you're not worrying about anything else. You're in the moment and you're experiencing your life. So that was fantastic. So yeah, I get what you mean. You get some of that stuff back, or you get something. So I think I know, at least from that perspective, from my perspective, I think that's what you mean. And from my perspective, I loved it. So.
Great. Happy to hear that.
Yes, I'm very happy to hear that too. So you're wonderful. I mean, that's why we do this stuff, to help you and other people to have these moments where they say, wow, my life changed, and it changed to the better, not to the worse. And now we work towards, more positive, a change to the positive, or to the neutral, as we would say.
Yes, exactly. And I want to go back to something that you guys talked about a few minutes ago, or maybe 10 or 20 minutes ago, regarding, we were talking about earlier generations, Daniel. I think it was you who mentioned it. You were talking about how, earlier generations just didn't deal with this stuff. And so we're here now. It's us. we have a lot of tools apart from just trauma healing. We have a lot of tools that I think are making this easier. The internet is definitely making this easier because people are able to talk about their stuff to an extent, and we're finding these shared connections and these shared experiences, which validates everything that you guys are doing as therapists and everything that people want to do for themselves as human beings who want to live their best life. And one of the things you talked about was, again, our earlier generations, our family, our families, our, and again, this isn't to, I want to say this right now. Childhood trauma is something that we all talk about and we say, and with a lot of people, like we all blame, our parents for this and that. And I'm sure there are cases where like heinous things have been done to us, or, people have had different kinds of experiences that really, really were just extremely painful. And we all understand this concept. And it's not to say that, whatever happened to you isn't, extremely important. But I think it's also important to know that it is because our parents, our grandparents, etc., have their own trauma that they didn't heal. It plays out in our lives as well, unfortunately. And with that, I want to talk about, why? Why didn't our parents, go through this? Why didn't our parents' friends go through this? Why didn't people we know in our past, why didn't they heal stuff? Why didn't they take time to heal their stuff? What happened there? Why is it just us right now?
So yeah, I love how you put it. So if we talk about childhood traumas, it's not to be able to blame somebody, and because blaming would also be not being CPL. It would be a trauma in itself, but it's to have our minds understand where it comes from, and when we understand, we can do the work and we can do something about it. And blaming wouldn't change anything. And why our parents didn't do it, I don't know. Perhaps for one thing, these techniques weren't available. The other thing was, I think, from development, that's just my hypothesis there. The way to deal with these things was to shut up and keep family secrets, and please everybody think about your grandparents and about the things you don't talk about. Okay? And I think in every family we have these secrets. And if you run back, and even with family constellations, you usually come up with some sort of murder or, thing besides the marriage happening there or whatever. So there's, in every family, nobody is a saint. Everybody has their emotions and lives with them, and then drama plays out. And the way to deal with it was, you could either do it like in some cultures, they're killing each other, which is not really helpful for the society, because then fear comes up and insecurity comes up and society cannot prosper. And so the way to do it in Western society was to simply shut up about it, and perhaps go to your priest and talk about it. But yeah, usually just shut up. And now with the development, I think with the liberation and with the hippies or so, new things came up, new tools were developed, and now we're seeing the fruits out of all of this work.
Seriously, it's a bit like asking why didn't our great grandparents didn't have airplanes.
Yeah.
Because we weren't there yet. It needed a certain time to develop the techniques.
Yeah, that makes sense. But we're here now, and we have them. But there's still a lot of people, even earlier generations that are still not wanting to go to therapy. I mean, we still have, the machos, the macho people, the macho perspective, the therapies for crazy people and for sissies and for, what do I need therapy for? We still have a lot of resistances, right? And this goes even for people who are doing the work. I mean, I myself find days where I'm like, I don't feel good today. Like, I feel uncomfortable, and maybe I should work on this. And then I don't. So again, going back to what we started with, the main topic, behaviors that we as humans have that are trauma based. I feel like resistance is a big one, right?
Yeah, Absolutely. And I just had, some gathering of people and talking about emotions, and they were not therapists per se. And then one of the persons said, "Oh, but if I work on this, I work on my fears. I basically work on my emotional injuries, and then I'm not strong anymore. I'm weak." I was like, "What? Please explain." But this is like trauma-based logic, yeah, because there's some sort of logic that working on your emotions might steer them up, and then you cannot control them, and then you're fearful of your emotions, and fear is trauma. And then you come to the logic to make all of this somehow put it in the box, yet you don't touch that stuff because otherwise I will be weak and I want to be strong. And this is one of the resistance that plays out in the head of the person saying, "No, I don't do it." They usually find the argument, and the argument just is a reflection of the trauma constellation they have inside. They just made some sort of sense, what Ilya said before, with their filters. They made sense with their filters, and for people not having these filters, it's like, sorry, I can't follow that logic. But for people having these same filters, they say, yeah, right, that's why I'm not doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You want to hear more about these sentences? I've written down some more.
Yeah, please do. Please.
One other fun thing was, if I do the work, I'm not there anymore. I was like, okay, I don't get it, because where would you be? But that was the strong belief why that person didn't want to work on their traumas. I know that that I'm going to feel bad afterwards. And I asked, "Have you tried it?" "No." I said, "Okay, but how do you know?" "Because I know." Well,
that's the perfect example for what I said before. You cannot see reality as long as you're still inside the box. It's impossible. You can only make conjectures, and those conjectures are trauma-driven, which is why they're not real, which is why it's just something wrong when you're projecting into the future about what it would be like if you didn't have that.
That's so interesting. Do you feel like these three examples are common perspectives that people share whenever we talk about resistances and healing? Do you think that's how most of the world sees it?
it's like this or different? Yeah.
Yeah, like these examples, like these three examples, are they pretty common?
There's another one. I have already done some work on it, and if I would do more work on it, then I would open the box up and I would have to redo everything again.
Pandora's box.
Yes.
That's a good one.
I was like, okay, but as I said, we are doing the work and it's done then. But no, that can't be true. I just have the feeling that that the person said that it will be will be the same before. I said, okay. Then there was one person who was really honest, who didn't come up with these logical models. Simply said, "I'm afraid."
Okay. Yeah, and that's really what it boils down to, right?
Exactly. And then another person said, "Nobody can help me with my grief." I was like, okay, but we just talked about grief, and actually here in the podcast we didn't talk about grief, but grief is also something which people suffer from, even year long, and it's a special kind of trauma which can be healed fairly easy, and then still you have to do the process, and you still have to come to the acceptance of grief, but that person sincerely said that nobody was able to help the grief, not having had experience with our techniques, but was sure that nobody would be able to help.
Why do some people? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's just another example of the resistance.
Gotcha.
If I deal with my emotions, I'm going to be weak and sick.
Okay. Seems kind of.
If I deal with my emotions, I'm going to feel bad, and I don't want to have that today.
Okay.
Emotions are sissy stuff. Coming back to the macho attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sissy stuff is a regulatory term referring to women being the supposedly more emotional gender. Here we're back to protections, right?
Supposedly, because that's not true.
Yeah, but that's how men who have that protection on women see it.
Yeah. So what happens with these resistances? Like, how do you help people who are obviously like using these resistances to not move forward in their lives, or not, to not become better selves, not just for themselves but for the rest of the world? Because ultimately, like, you can think about trauma in two ways, at least. One is, I don't want to feel like shit, or I want to feel even better. I want to reach the things that I have, the things that I can't reach because of what I am holding on to. And then you can also think of humanity or the world as like a system. And you can think of it as the same, like if it was an entire human body. And if you have the more healthier cells you have, or the more healthier parts you have, then the system works even better. And right now it doesn't. I mean, there's a lot of wars, there's a lot of genocide, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of, like you were saying, sexism, a lot of misogyny, a lot of cruelty, just a lot of crappy things. Not to say that there isn't, phenomenal aspects to humanity in terms of empathy and creativity and a lot of stuff. Just a lot of stuff. But yeah, I mean, how do you work with people who maybe are there, but they have these resistances?
Well, if they have the attitudes that you just said, they're possibly listening right now, or they're coming to therapy. But if they have the beliefs that I just quoted, then they're possibly not coming to therapy, and they're just resisting it, and they will stay in that mode, in that resistance, until the power struggle inside is too strong, and then they come to the belief they need to do something about it. Sadly, this happens most of the time when there's a big thing, like an accident, like a separation of a couple, or death, or something like this. Then the inner pressure gets so high that people then look for a way to calm this. Okay? But just out of cognitive thinking and reasoning, I'm not feeling well, so I need to do something about it. Usually then these resistances are stronger. Inga, what would you like to say to that?
Yeah, well, if I can just quote myself, 51% of you need to want to do this work. That's what I tell my clients. It's quite possible that they have a lot of resistance, but I need that 51%, just a tiny bit more than the part that doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's also something really important. If somebody has this struggle, as Inka pointed out very logically, I just say if there's no desire, there's no wish to change, so there's no acceptance that there's a need to change, and then there's no desire to change, we can't make somebody do that. That has to be, that's actually a prerequisite inside. There has to be that desire. And Inka puts it very nice, 51% desire. There can be 49% believing all of these resistance phrases I just said, but 51% need to have that desire to change.
Okay. Interesting.
It would be lovely if we could just pull humanity kicking and screaming out of this. No, sorry.
I don't wanna. Yeah, that would be great. But like you said, people have to be able to do it because it's still work. It's not like it's magic. You still have to do the work, and you still have to sit with your uncomfortable emotions. And even though we have a lot of things that make it easier, we also have a lot of things that make it easier to not do the work, right? Like, there's so many distractions in our world. You can get distracted with becoming a workaholic, with I mean, technology has been, again, a double-edged sword. Um, I wanted to go back really quick and say that we have talked a little bit about grief. We talked about it last week, I think, or maybe 2 weeks ago. But I do have a question. I mean, I feel like grief is a tricky one because, like, I can speak about it personally. I had a friend who sadly passed away last September, I believe, or October, and it was something really unexpected. He had a brain aneurysm, and he's still really young. And the idea of letting go of grief, as we talked about with Inca, and it was like something like 15 minutes. It sparked two things in me. One was that, and I'm saying it just to have a debate, but I want to say it. It feels like almost unnatural because you have this relationship that I feel like if you were to just say goodbye to the negative stuff, it's almost like the way I see it, and I think the way most people would see it would be you're just not paying respect to this person. It's almost like the negative feelings are an important part of paying respect to this person. And also, it also feels kind of like not natural in the sense that it just goes away so quickly. It's, again, it feels hard to believe, especially because I think last time we talked about not we talked about how there are some types of trauma techniques that just hide the pain away rather than heal it. And so, it made me think like, would that fit in that category, or is it just, I want to play devil's advocate here. I want to talk about this because I feel like, again, this is I'm playing average Joe when I talk about these things to you guys who have the experience and the technicality. So, what do you guys think about what I just said?
Love it, Sergio. And let's play. You play the devil's advocate to that extreme, and I play the other extreme. And actually, on Clubhouse, Inka's in the middle, so she can fix things afterwards. So I would take a different stand. I would take a stand that I'm not 100% familiar with Indian or Hindu philosophy, but as much as I've understood them, there's the belief that the person passing away stays with the family, and then for 2 or 3 days, I think 3 days it was, and then if the family basically sorted everything out, and that person sees that everything is working out well, can pass on to the next phase of that person's journey. But if that person is hovering, let's put that as an image, hovering over the house of the family, and sees that they are in pain and not wanting to let him go and crying and living out their drama, then basically this drama holds this other spirit captive in that area and can make that spirit move on. Okay, so that's, I'm actually putting it this way because that's the other extreme. Okay, so you said that it's not, if I'm not hurting, I didn't pay respect to that person. And I say, if you're hurting, you're actually hurting that person as well because that person can't move on.
Right. Well, it almost feels like the only way to keep alive a person is with that feeling. Like, you must feel that you lost them, and with you losing them comes grief, right? So when you think about them, you feel like they're not there, and that's you kind of keeping them there with you. That's you keeping their memory alive and your love for them. That's the way I would think most people would see it. But, again, that's just my perspective.
No, and I love it. And Inka, please fix it now.
Oh my God. There's this triangle, right? Actually, I don't quite know what to say because both of these beliefs subscribe to a belief system. And that depends on which society you're in. and what's the acceptable thing to do. And again, the acceptable thing to do may not necessarily really be the trauma-free thing to do. I think you do a much better job at not grieving because it's better for your health, and going through that sensation of loss and coming out at the other end with a sensation of gratitude that you had a chance to witness the life of that human being. You saw a bit of what their life was like and how it touched you, and that's something to be grateful for.
I love the sweetness of your voice, Inge, putting that in there.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so it falls outside of the spectrum of trauma and more of a belief system of how people where you're at see life or see death and see grief.
Well, a little bit, because Inge said you can heal that strong emotion, that grief, trauma, and then you can take that perspective that she proposed.
Yeah, that's true.
When you keep that feeling, you're not able to see that positive. Again, it's a filter.
That's true.
If you keep that trauma, it's a filter. And then I would like to add, why do you need that feeling of that person still there? That person has moved on. Why do you have that egotistical need to have that person there?
Yeah, it's very true. I feel like we're literally discussing everything we've talked about theoretically right now live, because and this is a great example. I mean, like, you're asking that, and because this to me was one of the first deaths in my life that I felt like really deeply affected me on an emotional level, and I was able to feel it, and that's where I'm at actually. So for me, I feel like I don't want to let go of this negative feeling because it makes me cry and it makes me feel connected to that person. And so whether this is resistance or not, it makes me feel like I'm afraid that if I don't have this feeling, then this connection to someone that I deeply cared about will be gone. And so I am afraid of losing that grief. I feel like it's the one thing that really holds me close to this person that was very important in my life when he was alive and still is, but it makes me feel close to him still. And whether it's a resistance or not that's playing out, that's how I see it. I am genuinely afraid that if I don't have this feeling anymore, that I will I will lose him. I would really lose him.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
I see. Well,
and you now gave me another sentence for my list of resistance. Thank you very much, Celia.
You know what? That's actually great that you explained that from your perspective, because I'm now better able to understand my mom. Because I think exactly that is what was going on for her when she lost my dad. Mm-hmm. She has been grieving and really, really suffering.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, you've been working with me before, we can deal with this in a different way, and I can help you through that. But she didn't want to do it, so she put herself through this enormous grief and enormous suffering.
Wow.
Even though she had a chance to do something about it, probably with that belief that if she actually did let go of that feeling, she would lose it again.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds pretty similar, and I think it's because of what you said. You can't see reality. You can't see what's after that. You cannot see a brighter future. And I know that sounds very dark, but I just mean, like, you can't see what could be. You can only see what these feelings give you. And what these feelings give you are it's two things. It's a sacrifice, right? It gives you like this sadness and it gives you this grief, but for the price of only like infinite, sadness that won't go away, you get to feel close to that person. So it almost feels like, because of what we know about emotions and what we know about, in general, it feels like that's, to me, intuitively feels like, oh, you know what, that's probably normal. That's probably the price we all have to pay as human beings for for keeping connections. You know, like that's probably what I have to pay for staying close to this person who's now gone. There's no other way of feeling close to them if I don't feel all this enormous grief that shows me how much I love them. And it's like you said again, it feels like you can't see beyond that. So you can't see that maybe if I feel better, I'll be able to look at all the positive things, or you can't expect to know how you're going to feel positively because you don't feel like that.
Yes, exactly, and that's the filter, and that's the paradox we discussed before, the acceptance. Um, when we heal this, we'll be able to see. I don't like the phrase healing it better. It's just if we heal it, we are able to see without that filter. Now with that filter still installed, things look very grim. And I was wondering if there's this desire, this need to have him or her with you, also has to do something with what we discussed earlier with the projections. So if that's part of you, and of course you don't want to lose that part, but the integration process of all your parts, that's basically really the important step. And for the integration, there needs to be acceptance. Okay. Yeah. So,
and then probably, this kind of feeling of loss can easily echo other losses that we've had before. I know for my mom it was definitely the case.
Yeah.
But she was reminded of the way her dad died. So, that made it worse because that death probably also wasn't really, how should I say, processed.
Yeah.
And so it was still hanging around and just waiting to be triggered again.
What's the difference there between processed and integrated? And this still always baffles me. I mean, a perfect example is this. I mean, grief is a good example. I mean, someone passes away, someone we love. Some people are able to move on. Some people cannot. Sometimes it's those who are the closest, right? The closest, the ones who spend the most time with them. You are technically, when you're grieving every day, you're feeling that. You are feeling those feelings. So what is different about grief that never ends and grief that can be healed with some of these, trauma techniques, emotional processing techniques that you guys use? What's different there? I mean, why can some people process them and move forward in varying degrees, and the people that can't? Why can some people do it and why can't some people not do it without help?
Well, I just mentioned that in the case of my mom, she has had previous losses,
Okay.
which already were quite traumatic. So I think it just added. So basically the same thing was triggered. And for a good deal, it wasn't even about my dad anymore. It was just about her being left alone. And so there can be many components to the grief. Yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe those earlier things aren't as easy to process or to fully accept.
Well, they've been kind of like left to smolder somewhere, and then the fire kind of like opened up again, or like the embers got fuel when my dad died, and so it's essentially the same trauma that's coming up again. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think I can add that when I talk to people who are in the grieving process, and perhaps that's also a good question for you, Sergio, do you feel that part of you is missing?
That's a good
And
question.
when and with letting go of that grief, would you have that fear, that belief that this part of you would be missing all the time? And so you hold on to that emotion so that part at least is theirs, it fills the part that is missing, or yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, I think I don't necessarily feel something would be missing. I feel like the person is missing. I don't know if that's what you mean. And he played a very wonderful role in my life, and I don't know. I mean, maybe for some people, I'm not sure. For me, it does. Behaviorally, in some ways, like I wrote a song, at the very early days to kind of what I thought is processing, but really just being able to be with those feelings. And the song really helped me put into perspective that I felt and that I feel. And so when I listen to the song, I'm brought back immediately to that grief. Um, but I never finished the song. It's not fully fleshed out, and in a way, I think I do that so that I can kind of stay with that. I can kind of hold on to those feelings as well. So, um, maybe in that sense, that's what I got.
Okay, so yeah, a little bit. So you already have done some processing, which is great. You seem not to be finished, and as I said, if there's this feeling of loss and also feeling that part of me is lost, or there's something missing, then of course it's very difficult to accept that. We want to be whole, and we don't want to be parts missing, and so um, of course we try to hold on to that, but we still can. But these techniques we're doing would actually get rid of this feeling of that something is missing, and perhaps we easier can let go of that other part, and then accept what has happened, accept life to be this way right now, and then you move on, another person has moved on, and you might even be able to finish the song.
Do you know that there are traditions that actually deal with this kind of loss with singing?
No, not at
So I
all.
thought that's very interesting. It's a very interesting way of actually processing it. So
Well, it reminds
I
me a bit
would
of breath
recommend to
work.
finish that song. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of breath work. I mean, I don't know if that's how everyone does it, but I don't really have a lot of formal. I have some formal studying, but the way I gravitate to music is something that reminds me a lot of breath work, to be honest, especially when it's something that's very emotionally charged. And it's this idea of just kind of letting your like subconscious, your unconscious, in breath work, in holotropic breath work, as I remember doing it, there are moments where you're just supposed to kind of resonate. So whatever's going on inside you, you're supposed to just kind of make these sounds. And eventually, it's almost like the sounds you're making are going to feel as you feel inside. And it's again, it seems like intuitive, or it just feels right, right? Like, and there's again, I mean, there's this idea that like frequencies resonate better with. I mean, that's why we like certain types of music more than others, but specific frequencies might feel exactly how you're feeling inside. And so I try to do that, and I think that's why it was helpful for me to write music. It's helpful for me to write music because I can be patient enough in that music can be a safe space where I can feel safe enough to resonate with what I feel and play enough with certain melodies or chords or whatever, and then eventually it's hard to explain, but that the chords that are coming out of my guitar or the notes that are coming out of my mouth just feel like how I deeply feel about some kind of like highly emotional thing. And with this one, it was really helpful because I felt like I hit the right melodies, and then I would just play them over and over, and it just helped me release feelings. It helped me like feel a lot of grief and a lot of crying, and that's super interesting. I mean, I like the idea. I don't know how important it is to trauma healing, but I've always been really interested in music and how the role it plays in and tapping into these, like safety spaces of acceptance and love. And if you go to YouTube, there's tons of videos that help you with that. There's binaural beats, which I know can be used for maybe EMDR. Some techniques use that. They use sound, and you can find like 2 hours worth of like loving frequencies. And I'm sure people use that. I have, to get into these calming states and these loving states. I don't know entirely how helpful they are. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. It's really interesting.
Yeah, music can be powerful. Yeah, I can't add anything else. So I love to experiment with them as well, and these healing frequencies that are there. And I haven't found anything yet what 100% works, but it's quite an interesting research subject.
Well, frequencies is definitely something to be looked into. I think we haven't quite grasped the overall concept yet, why they do what they do. So probably some research would be good to do, but they definitely do something. Like if you have ever been lying on a monochord, like this kind of how should I say, like a doctor's examination table, and they put a monochord, which is an instrument with all the strings tuned to the same note.
Mm-hmm.
And you basically lie in that bed of frequencies, and somebody keeps beating the strings.
Mm-hmm.
And like really, you go somewhere else. It definitely transports you and has some also emotionally healing qualities.
Interesting. Yeah, and then I mean, the idea of resonance is very, very, very close to that. It's somewhere there. I mean, the I don't know if we're there yet, but it's somewhere there. Yeah, and just the idea that you can have certain tones and they create specific like patterns. Have you seen that with like sand? And you play like a certain note, and they just create these very, very, very unique patterns. Yeah, there's something there, but that's something I'm not well versed in at all. So.
Yeah, I think we still lack the theoretical background so that we know which particular frequency to employ for which particular problem, and it's probably way more complicated than an A to B relationship like I just depicted here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
But I have to tell you, my bed is waiting for me. I have a long day in front of me tomorrow, and it starts very early, so I think I will have to say goodbye now.
I think this would be a great time then. 3 o'clock here. Inka, Daniel, thank you again. It's been great. A lot of great topics, and I think everything that we said in a way kind of ended with a practical example, and really grateful for that. I mean, I hope people take a lot out of this. I know I did. And, I look forward to talking more and to bringing more insight and more conversation to these topics. So thank you so much.
Sandy, thank you so much for being our host, our moderator. And it was a lovely talk. And we are open for questions. So whenever you are listening to this, please drop a comment, write us an email, give us some questions, and we're happy to talk about that as well.
Yep, or you keep them for your next topic.
Absolutely. And guys, if you enjoy this, if you have questions, if you are looking for advice, reach out to Inka and Daniel. And, I look forward to hearing from you guys. Everybody be safe. Okay? Bye, Inka.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Daniel.
Bye.
Bye.